can see the screen okay, yeah?
Yep. All
Cool.
good.
Okay, let's make a start. So, yes, hello, everybody, and welcome to the August edition of the Welsh Azure user group. Thank you, everybody, for joining. As usual, quick introductions from your Welsh Azure user group team. It's myself and Matt, basically. Yes, there's our LinkedIn profiles. Please do go and add us on LinkedIn or look us up on the old Twitter or X, as it's called now. Feel free to interact. It's a community user group. We're always open for ideas, suggestions, speakers. There's a call for speakers page that we can get to. Yeah, so look, if you've got any ideas, suggestions, want to join in, anything like that, please feel free to reach out to myself or Matt. Be more than happy to have you on board. But back to tonight's session, as per usual, another two fantastic community speakers joining us. Thank you both to Dieter and to Johan for joining us tonight. We'll be kicking off with Dieter's talk fairly soon around optimizing email triage using Azure AI Language Studio and Logic App. So, like I was just saying to Dieter earlier, I use this as my own little personal self-study group, to be honest. So, yeah, really intrigued to see what's going on there. And then we'll be joined by Johan a little bit later on to talk around Azure static web apps and Blazor WASM. So, again, you know, did a little bit of tinkering with that a couple of years ago. So, increasingly, excited to kind of understand where we are today with the static web apps. Timings wise, usual timings. I'll stop rambling in a couple of minutes. So we like Dee to take the floor. Johan will be following immediately afterwards. Roughly around about 8:15, we'll be kicking off the quiz. So get your mobile devices or your browsers ready to join in. And as usual, we've got an abundant. I would say it's an abundance of prizes. We've got 4 prizes. So top two, usually we give away the £25 Amazon vouchers. And then, as usual, thanks to our sponsor Packet, we've got a couple of Packet ebooks. And I did write down what ebooks we've got for today, but I can't remember. I'll have to dig that out and I'll tell you a little bit later when we're doing the quiz. So yeah, roughly about 8:30, we should be wrapped up by about then. So get your tea prepared for about that time. Okay, couple of rules quickly just to walk through. Usual stuff. This is, like I say, community user group, so should go without saying, but everybody, please be courteous to each other. No such thing as a silly question. That's what we're here to do, is learn from others. So please do, ask all of those questions that you need to ask. But all I'd say is please stay on mute unless you're invited to come off mute to speak, and use that chat window. So the chat window is accessible to everybody. And I'll just ask Dieter and Johan if they can keep an eye on the chat window, or at the end of the talk they can revisit those questions and get you some answers. I'll leave a QR code at the end of the event for some feedback. It's always useful. What do you think of the talks? What ideas have you got? What kind of talks do you want to see? That kind of stuff. And yet the quiz after the second speaker. So after Johan's talk, we will be jumping into that quiz. But most importantly, please be interactive and enjoy the sessions. Before we jump in, as usual, a note from the sponsors. So I do this every month, but it should go without saying that these kinds of community user groups, they've got to be supported. It's not a great deal of money to support a virtual event, but certainly when it comes to face, these things cost some money. So big thanks to Servant. They've been with us pretty much since day one. If you don't know who Servant are, take a look at their website. They're a pure play Azure professional services Microsoft partner. There's a few of the exec board there, and again, they're all really kind of open to contact. So if you're looking for a job, if you're looking to have some work done, feel free to reach out to those guys. And there's a little bit more about them as well. They've got a great deal of experience in the industry and a lot of good people working for them. So thank you for sponsoring us to Servant. On the same token, like I say, a good few months back now, we were lucky enough to be approached by CreditSafe, who've got a HQ down in Cardiff, South Wales. We've had the guys on to do some talks around their whole cloud platform and what they've been up to in terms of using AWS and Azure and other clouds. So really good to have that support from CreditSafe. Again, they're always open to finding good talent as well. So feel free to reach out and speak to them. And if you want some contacts, reach out to me and I'll give you some names of folks to speak to them there. And finally, but by no means least, Packet, who came on board only a few months back now, but they've been really great in supporting us with, again, just some spot prices in the terms of ebooks, which I hope you'll agree. Everybody that's in tech has probably seen a Packet ebook over the years. If you haven't, you've been under a rock. They've been around for. I was actually quite intrigued to know that they started in Birmingham, in the UK. Where they started. So it's all good stuff there. So yeah, big shout out to all our sponsors. Really is appreciated for all the support that we get from them. And with all of that said, I think we can crack on with the event. So on that token, Dieter, I will hand over to you. Thank you, sir.
Yep. Thank you, John, for the introduction. See if I can share my screen now. Is that all visible on your end?
Yeah, got you all. Yeah.
Good.
That's perfect. Just minimize a couple of things. Lovely. So welcome to the agenda of the presentation today. I'll be talking about a little bit about Azure AI Language Studio based on a project I've done a couple of years ago. And I wanted to share a couple of insights for those who haven't used it so far, and also a little bit of the application, what we did as a rollout. So this is the agenda for today. We will look quickly at linguistic technologies, where is it coming from, what do we have today, what did we used to have back in the days. Azure AI Language Studio, we will look at a business case about triage, and then we will look at how we can integrate this with middleware or logic apps. There will be a little bit of demo at the end of the presentation as well, and there's always time for questions. So if you would have questions, you're very welcome to put it in the chat box as well. Cool. Quick introduction about myself, basically. So my name is Peter. I work with Azure since 2012, a really long time ago. Been doing mostly middleware integration, a little bit of Dynamics as well. I am a public speaker and a blogger as well, and I'm based in London. If anyone wants to connect, you're very welcome to scan the QR code and connect with me on LinkedIn or my blog. Cool. Introduction about Azure AI Language Studio or linguistics in general. Now, this might be very unfamiliar for certain people on the right side. This is called a CD. Now, interestingly enough, the technology started already 30 years ago. And this is an interesting story of a kind of one example that I found back in the 90s, a company called Leonard and Houspie, and they had speech technology already. So you need to think about very basic interactions such as text to speech or speech to text. Later, this was also integrated within Windows XP, right? But unfortunately, the company went bankrupt and it was acquired by another company, Nuance Communications or SoftScan. And as you see, this is a very old article from the BBC in the 2000s. But interestingly enough, and this is where I really want to, talk about today, it was also acquired by Microsoft 2 years ago. And I was personally a little bit shocked because I knew a couple of people back in the days that had stock in that initial company, Leonard and Houspie, 30 years ago. So it's really interesting to see that technology that Microsoft has or bought a few years ago is still being used and, is quite old as well. And they're really leveraging that today as well. Actually, what has changed since 30 years ago, and I think a lot has changed since 30 years ago. We are obviously not in the 90s anymore, right? There's way more data available than before. So as we use our phone, as we use more applications, it's also way easier to access that information and that data. We've got all access to the internet, and having access to AI is basically something of daily life. Think about Siri, think about Amazon. And this is a really interesting feature. And this is also, where it goes back to AI, specifically for language or categorization on the left side. You see that Amazon, this was a print screen I took last weekend, basically. And you see that Amazon is recommending me a couple of products. And it seems to be that 35% of the purchases through Amazon are based on personalized recommendations. And that's a big one. Now, the biggest change I think that happened is obviously that today we can use AI-based tool or linguistic AI. It's much easier to get started for everyone. You don't need a huge upfront cost. And now with the free access, even on Azure, you can just get started for free, unless you start using, a huge amount of transactions. So at the end of the demo, if anyone wants to kind of repeat the demo or play around, you can just also start with a kind of a free version there. So yeah, quick recap. Obviously, this AI has shifted from a niche to very mainstream. We are looking at to adding values, which you will see in the demo as well, and it's accessible now for everyone. Specifically for AI Language Studio, where are we based? Because I personally cannot keep track of all the AI possibilities with Microsoft and Azure in general. So it's really good to understand where are we based within the AI space of Azure. And as you see in this this square here, right, we are talking about AI language here, but we also got AI vision, speech, search. I think the most popular nowadays, what most people talk about, is the Open AI service. But these are all building blocks, and we can effectively combine them together for a more, kind of an enterprise application, something that works together, and we can leverage them as building blocks as well. I will provide a couple of more demonstrations and information about how we can leverage the other ones. But obviously today we will be more focusing about AI language and the software actually. So the AI Language Studio, some people might be a bit confused and say, "Hey, is this a new product?" Because it doesn't seem to be the case, right? It is, well, not a new product as a whole, and the reason is it used to be part of cognitive services, and there's lots of books that have been written about it, and even certifications, but it was rebranded a couple of years ago. I believe from Microsoft to be more specific that this is really the part about language and linguistics. So it's part of Microsoft AI suite of all the tools they basically provide. And I think it offers really two huge benefits for every company. So there's a big time to market basically. And the reason why is because it provides pre-built algorithms and models that you can train. There's no need to develop any coding, anything in Python. You don't need to be occupied with prompt engineering or complicated software development. The AI Language Studio allows you to get started straight away with this. So even a proof of concept, what we will see later in the demo, can be built in, well, quite fast actually, to be fair. So those are obviously the biggest benefits here. If you want to do more advanced stuff and then, use something else besides the existing algorithms, then, well, obviously you're free to do so. But we will also look later on how we can use those existing ones. So a couple of the key features that it has, for those that work with AI and text in general, it's obviously relying on natural language processing. So it means that a computer or a server is able to understand what you're trying to explain to them, is able to understand important information, is able to understand emotions, and is able to, in generally, understand synonyms or different meanings behind it. It's also what's used in prompt engineering, and also what's in AI Language Studio available. It's able to understand more than 100 languages, including dialects. You can also integrate it with bots and virtual assistants, which I will not be touching today, but just keep it in the back of your mind. The fourth one is good analytics and insights. We will see later that once the model has been built, AI Language Studio provides you with feedback how the software can be trained much better. So this is also interesting to see. How can you improve the product? How can you get better results from the model, and what can be improved in general? And obviously, easily integratable with existing Azure services. So that's good as well. A little bit of real life examples for those who are still a little bit confused. Identify the language of this text. So this could be a good example that you could want to ask to them and ask, hey, what language has this text been written? You might want to summarize the text, and I believe this is now really popular in Teams nowadays, where you can summarize a meeting, and it exists in other kind of Copilot applications as well nowadays. Kind of look into Google review perspective or customer feedback. Is something positive or negative? This could also then eventually, trigger a workflow on your end. You could extract a phone number from a text or an address from a text. For medical needs, it could be provide a diagnosis and medication from an existing letter or letters or multiple documents. Or maybe you just want to identify the main concept of an existing text. So those are a couple of examples that I think are kind of a low level, easily to get started with. So you might have a grasp of what the software is able to do. Go back here. These are a couple of algorithms that you can do, or a couple of features that AI Language Studio provides to you. It's definitely not a whole list because the list would be too large, basically. But yeah, it's definitely a couple of items that you can look into. So the first one would be recognizing words or phrases from an existing text. And this is what we will use for the demo as well. We will extract information, extract key data that we are specifically looking for. Or maybe you want to react sensitive data, identify them, identify a specific language with language detection is also possible. Sentiment analysis is then again relating back to that Google review. You might want to figure out if this is something people like or not like. An Amazon review or anything else, maybe an email, understand some urgency there. Summarization, produce a summary of existing documents, existing text, really to speed up a couple of items there. Very relatable to key phrase extraction, or maybe you kind of want to use that for health. So on the left side, the algorithm is available, and there's way more online. Unfortunately, I really couldn't fit it in the slide, but definitely a little bit of information on what can you actually do with the software, right? Now, the steps are always the same. So we've got a 7-step process that needs to be applied in order to create a model and to use it. So the first step is we need to select the right data to tell to Azure AI Language Studio and instruct them what's expected. So generally, a good selective amount of data would be that for every use case, there's a couple of samples, right? But it's also really vague how many you will need. You will see it later on the model performance. So start out with a kind of a set. Define what you are trying to identify and push that into AI Language Studio. So this is the input, the schema data. And the second step would be, what is the expected output? And that's what we call label data, right? So input could be a document, and output is, what are we expecting from the AI to return to me? And you kind of rinse and repeat that for every scenario, for every possibility, a couple of times with a couple of variations, until the model has a good understanding about, hey, this seems to be what you're trying to expect. Now, once that sample data is uploaded, with a push of the button, you can train the model, and then Microsoft, the AI Language Studio will spin up some CPU, and will try to put all that information, the input and output that you provided, we'll try to put that all in an algorithm based on, or in a model based on the existing algorithm. So this usually takes a little bit of time, depending on the amount of data available and the complexity of the algorithm. This can take between 30 seconds and maybe a few hours, basically. Once that's done, because this step of train model is just let them do the work, basically, there will be a result available. And I will talk about this more in the next slide together with the improved model. But this basically means that you want to have an understanding how good is the model trained, right? So those two steps we will cover a little bit in the next slide. And once you've got an understanding about how well the model is defined, how successful it is, right? How well the predictions can be done, we are looking at deploying a model. Deploying a model typically goes through an API with a key. You might want to involve APIM as well to kind of like reach out to the endpoint. But that's really up to your choice. So deploying the model means you release the model that's been built. So it's also accessible by applications to use that model and to be invoked. And then the last one, what we call is extract entities. And this actually means that you call the application, you invoke them, and you ask, hey, can you tell me the output that I'm expecting? Now, this might sound a little bit vague, but we will quickly look into the model performance, and then I'll look into kind of a kind of sample to be a little bit more specific. For the AI model performance, this is an interesting screenshot. It tells you how precise the model has been trained. And why is this important? Because obviously this AI is not, this is not exact science. You tell them the expected input and the expected output. And then based on the trend analytics, it will tell you later on, this is my best guess. And the single sentence, this is my best guess, is basically how good is the model defined. Obviously, the more documents you provide with the larger amount of variations, the better the model will be trained. And typically, you would be looking at kind of an 80-20 ratio, right? So people will be using 80% of the data to train a specific model. And once that model has been trained, we use the existing data set 20% to test that model. And this is where then the F1 score comes from, the model performance. Interestingly enough, we spoke on the first few slides as well about feedback. This is a small sprint screen, but if this number would drop or would go below, there would be a list of recommendations as well that you might want to take. Maybe for a couple of samples, it's not very clear. Maybe there is overlap. And then you will see in the browser, hey, you could take those actions, right, to improve the model. Maybe you need more data. So that's interesting feedback as well. And this is all available before you actually deploy and release the model. The other indication that we have is a confidence score. And a confidence score is after the deployment of the model. We are looking in understanding how sure is the AI that this answer is correct. So it's a scale from 0 to 100, and 0 means, well, basically not sure at all, and 100 means very sure. So the higher the score, the better the confidence. And as we see in this small JSON extract, right? Funny enough, it's also one of the demonstration later on. You see that the result that came back from this request, right? It has a confidence score of 0.68. Obviously, it's up to you to define what you want to do with this answer, right? You might want to take a specific action. If the confidence score is too low, let's say there is a certain threshold, you might want to, just throw this answer in the trash in general. So that's also possible. So the good thing is it does provide a confidence score about how sure is it with this specific response. And then it's up to your application to see, do I want to use that response or not, and in which sense. Have a look at a business case that I had and worked on a while ago, basically. And this is a case for an insurance company. So I'll try to explain the case here, and then we can do a little bit of a quiz to see how good you guys are in doing the manual AI, so to speak. So this is the use case. A insurance company received a lot of emails about claims, and what they mostly do is they deal with claims management, and they also do policy management. That's the biggest amount of their business, basically. So they might receive this email, hey, for my policy number, and then we see a number, please find pictures attached of the damaged vehicle. And Rick obviously wants an answer, right? And what's happening? We have a mailbox that's been piled up with all emails from all the clients. And what's happening? We've got multiple full-time employees that are working on that mailbox. And they are really trying to sort out, is this an email for a car insurance policy? Is this an email for a life insurance policy? And then they would forward it to typically 3 departments. So we are looking at non-life, which is car, house, bicycle. We're looking at life. This is quite self-explanatory, I think. And then health, which is GP, doctor's appointment, maybe surgeries. And the reason is because those people behind that deal with these claims, they have very specific knowledge, and they've got no understanding about the other one's knowledge, right? So one person is unable to deal with all the claims from all the company. So there is some triage going on, and this mailbox admin forwards all the information to the right mailbox. So a quick recap is that this person is responsible to assign the right work to a specific team, which also means that without them, more than 100 people would have no new work assigned. What we also noticed that they start really early at 7 a.m. to make sure that, the claim handlers, people that eventually do the work, they've got enough work ready. But on the opposite side, because people email in the afternoon, people email at night, people might email early in the morning, a lot of the emails populate in the morning as well. So they would start working at 7 and they would have thousands of emails. And maybe it was already finished by 1 p.m. Sometimes it would take up to 3 p.m. Sometimes it was 11 a.m. So there is a huge variance there. Sometimes also depending on the weather. So that's kind of what we have there. I've got a quick quiz here for those who are interested, and I kind of want to see how good we are in understanding how an email is related to certain insurance product. Now, you don't need to know anything about the insurance business at all. I just got a quick question. How would you figure out with the below email to what kind of insurance this is related to, right? So we've got 2 or 3 questions, and then for those who are wanting to participate, please feel free to put this in the chat. And the email is, as previously discussed over the phone this morning, please find pictures of my BMW attached. And Jonathan is interesting to obviously get an answer from client-facing team. So quick answer in the chat. 5, maybe 10 seconds here. Anything on my screen here? See some people that are related to insurance. That's nice. Give it a little bit of time here. So it's the people talking or chatting. I think that I'm gonna quickly go to the answer here. Indeed, I see most people answering car or non-life there, and you must have worked for insurance before. So obviously the key takeaway is the BMW here, right here. So that's an interesting thing. I've got another one. This is a maybe more complicated one. So how would you, as a mailbox handler, identify to which policy or claim or this is related to? Any answers is a good answer basically here. So I'm just looking for a couple of answers. What would be your way how to identify this? How would you send this to the right team? What's your approach here? Oh, I'm going to quickly wait about 20 seconds here. Yeah, I've seen a couple of interesting approach. Yeah. So we've got looking at the policy number. Some other people are thinking maybe the prefix from the policy number is related to an insurance product. Yeah, very good guess. It seems to be that the general sense is indeed looking at this policy number. Something about the policy number could use. Yeah. So indeed, and then we've got a last one basically. John is asking, see pictures attached. When can I receive a refund? And this is the picture. So last question, what do you think this is related to? Please drop it in the chat. Answers here. I think this is a really obvious one, right? Building and contents home. Indeed, this home is flooded, and yeah, John wants an answer about his home, right? So this is rather interesting how we deal with this as a human, and I think as a human we are pretty good in this. So how do we then translate this from human point of view to a binary point of view? That would be the question, right? So the target was here, we want to automate this email triage, right? We want to extract information from a certain email to have an understanding what we need to do. And therefore we will also use multiple language models to do so. And what we did is basically a 2-step process. So the first one was we wanted to first see in the specific email, what data can we actually extract with a high percentage of certainty? And the first example that we had was indeed a policy number or a claims number or maybe a reference number that we had that we wanted to use and extract from that email because that has a 1-to-1 ratio to the specific team or the policy. So that's the first step we did. Now, the problem appeared to be that most people don't provide a policy number, basically, depending on, I would say, the instructions given. And then what we would do is with a kind of a lower percentage of certainty, we would start to have a very good guess. So this is what we call email categorization. So an example that we've seen is a BMW, then is most likely related to a car insurance. If the email would contain prescription, well, guess what? It's probably health related. So this is the two-step process that we put in place. Now there's more options available, in general. I just want to give a couple of samples. You could also categorize the email based if it's a new claim or an existing claim. You could also sense the urgency from the sender, or one could maybe use additional information from the sender's email address to see if there's active claims, active policies, and reduce the number of guesses. And specifically for the home building where the person had a lot of water in the living room, you could use AI Vision Studio to see, view the attachment and kind of categorize it as well. So those are a little bit more possibilities just to kind of, give a small, little bit of information as well. So the first one is we want to extract the policy number from or a claims number, right? So what did we do? We used a custom name entity recognition algorithm, and this is used to extract specific words in an unstructured text. And as you see in the print screen below, this is what we had. You upload the sample document to Azure AI Language Studio, and then you add a couple of entities here. And in this case, we are only looking for a policy number for the sake of simplicity. And what happens, you click that button, you kind of underline it. And this is the step where you provide sample data and expected output. And this is also what we rinse and repeat quite a lot of time, basically. So based on this sample email, you tell Azure AI Language Studio, hey, this is a sample that I've got. This is my input. This is my output. And hopefully later on, you kind of expect that the trend is kind of understood here. And as you see in this email, this client is sending, my policy number is blah, 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 right? For the second catch, right, we are looking into what is this person actually referring to? And in this email, for example, we've got a case that's wanted to be opened based on the referral letter. I've attached the receipts so far. Obviously, the key takeaway here is referral letter. So we are expecting that the email is understood based on the context. And there's two options that we can use here. So we went for a custom text classification, and it comes in two flavors. You would either go for a single label classification or a multi-label classification. The classification understands the purpose of the text, and then you assign it to a specific category. And as you see in the right-hand side here, right, we've got a sample email again. This time it's for a storm. Yeah, indeed, a storm damage, right? And then we assign it to non-life. So it's probably a house insurance or anything else, right? So expect that the AI is able to understand the email, understands what's being said, and then based on anything with storm or a house, we tell them, hey, this must be non-life. Go to the next one. Quick information about the role of AI in middleware. That's good. We will also see later in the demo a little bit of additional information. I just want to give a quick hint on this is that for any AI or in general, you're really good in using your existing middleware. And the reason is because this is an application that's already being used literally in the middle of two or multiple applications. So it's a really good opportunity to use that middleware to enrich your data. And as you see in the email triage or the setup that we had for the insurance company, that's also what we did. So we had an existing process in place. We looked at the process. There was already middleware in place to receive and send kind of the emails into a ticketing system. And we used that system as well to enhance and reach the data there. So yeah, definitely something you might want to have a look into in your solution design later on. Azure obviously provides a lot of options here. We will look into a demo with a logic app because I think that's fairly straightforward for a demo. But just be aware there's multiple options available. And for those who are unfamiliar with any logic apps, you should make yourself very familiar at this stage. I would recommend it's a workflow designer that allow you to connect to cloud services and on-prem. The biggest benefit, obviously, is it has existing connectors available. It has a graphical designer, has workflow history available. and it integrates with Visual Studio, GitHub, repo. So it goes all the way from a rather small company to large enterprises with large amount of volumes. Skip that one here. So eventually, to kind of drill down on the solution that we had, what happened is that the email arrived. It already arrived in a ticketing system, in this case Dynamics, or some support. So Dynamics called Golden API, which was in the back a Logic app. And what happened is that Logic app first reached out to AI Language Studio and asked, hey, can you find that policy number from this specific email with a subject and with a body? It's trying to extract the right information, right? If that works, we reached out to Claims and Policy API. Now, in reality, it turned out to be multiple, but let's imagine for the sake of simplicity, this is just one. You reach out to this existing API, maybe a database, and you ask them, hey, does this policy number matches anything of your claims? If so, what kind of policy is this? Is this for car policy? Is this for a house policy? Is this for a bicycle policy? And then the kind of like the failback scenario was to try to find the specific department by trying to understand what's being said in this email. So this could be the email where people are referring to a referral letter, but they don't provide any reference number, right? Once everything was done, we kind of reached back to Dynamics, to the ticketing system, and we assigned the right department. So this was kind of the setup that we had, really simplified here, but this could be a very useful setup that maybe you want to use as well later on. Yeah, cool. And I've got a small demo here that I want to look into specifically for the setup about this. So what we will do with a Logic app is we will play around a little bit, and we will ask for a policy number and a department, and it's also a live demo, so hopefully everything goes well. If there would be questions for demo as well, feel free to reach them in the chat. And then we can have a look there as well. Cool. Yeah, demo time. Share my screen here. Back. Not really familiar with how the background is from everyone or what your related experience is. Now, in this case, I've got a very simple Logic app setup as a first demo. So this is an HTTP endpoint that I'm exposing, but it allows me for the demo to do a little bit more visual demonstration rather than code development for those who might be less familiar. So what we do is we receive an HTTP request and a response. This is just an API endpoint. But what we have is we've got options available here to connect with AI Language Studio here, or with Cognitive Services apparently. They're still using the old name. You so go to there, select that one, and then one can also select the right algorithm. Now, unfortunately, there's not enough time to demonstrate all the functionality in AI Language Studio, but we'll try to give a little bit of a demonstration about use cases that we had. So just you have a grasp of what's kind of possible there, right? So a lot of these algorithms are defined here. And once you kind of pick the right algorithm, one can also provide the right input for a specific action. And this is a simple example where we want to detect some language. You might want to provide a transaction ID and then some text. In this case, we've got a happy birthday in Italian. And I mean, I don't speak Italian, but I just Googled this anyhow. So this is what we are looking to. We can also change it to something else. So now let's see if we actually execute this workflow. What's the result of this, right? Oh, it already did go through. That was specifically fast. Nice. So now let's look at the input and the output. Again, really to avoid those, code development style demos. So the information that we provided was, hey, what's the kind of connection we are using? We are looking into, nope, this is not what I'm looking at. Yeah, the documents that was provided was this. So we provided a text and an ID. And now let's look at the output that was provided, right? So what did we receive back from the AI? In this case here, this is the response. I might zoom in a little bit because everyone can read this. So this is the response that we received. In this case, it was fairly certain it was in Italian, right? With a confidence score of 1. But it's also possible that I wasn't too sure. Maybe there was a typo, as a matter of fact. Kind of curious myself to see what will happen with a little bit of typo in between. If I go back to the demo here, we go to designer. I might put a double O, right? Let's see how good it is in understanding typos. Again, fairly simple example just to demonstrate a little bit what is possible. You now see at the output. I'm kind of curious to see how that might change. Yeah, it did change a little bit due to the typo, interestingly enough, but it's still fairly certain this is written in Italian. Now, this is a fairly simple example. We will be covering now a little bit of a different example for specifically the insurance, right? Very isolated proof of concept or sample that I've kind of set up as well. Very simple as well, also in a Logic App Designer, so you have this workflow ready. And the first thing that we did is we did extract a policy number here. We check if that policy number is found, and if so, we extract the department. Now, what we do is basically based on the response here. No, this is not what I'm looking for. We just provide all the information here, the policy of department there, and I just expose this as an endpoint. I think I will just execute the Postman collection that I've got, 2 samples, and then I think it will be more clear. We don't have too much time, I think, but we can still finish it. So we've got a sample here for help me have a touch doctor's consult. Oh, this is not the first example that I want. First example that I want was a bit more specific. Someone is referring to a policy number here in an email, and obviously there's no additional information. And what's happening is we are able to extract this policy number here, and there is no department at this stage because the policy number is a 1-to-1 ratio. Now, if we look at the result from the workflow, let's have a look what's happening. So as you see here, we do call that specific extract policy number algorithm with the email that we provided here, right? Also including the subject. And then in the output, right, the result from that service call, there's quite a lot of information available, but specifically the most important one is obviously this, right? So the documents, which is referring to the response, it is, in this case, 98% sure that this number is the matching policy number. So interestingly enough to know, I will do kind of another demonstration as well. In this case, there is no policy number available, but we are just looking at stolen electronics to see if this person is able to receive a feedback on this email, right? And now we have the second case, right? So the first response would not come back as much. There's basically no responses at all. It's not sure. There's no documents provided here. It's still fairly successful. And then the second one, what we have here is, let's have a look. Just scrolling down a little bit. This seems to be a non-live, indeed, so more house related. With a fairly low confidence score, but okay, it's all about improving and adding more documents, right? Interestingly enough, what happens if you kind of spook it, right, and then kind of combine the two together? So in this case, we are still looking for a doctor's consult, but the person is asking, can you use do I need a car to drive to the appointment? So I'm trying to confuse it here a little bit with a car, or can I use my BMW to drive to the appointment? Just to to prove that it's not just using keyword extraction here, but it's also able to understand the text and being able to make a judgment on that. That's quite important or interesting to understand. So what will happen is it will still, I think, potentially understand something with the driver. I have no idea. Let's look at the result here. We've got it back. It did indeed identify this health related, but I'm kind of curious to see how this now turned out to be. And it didn't. But yeah, so we did indeed classify this as a health question and not something for car insurance or any car product available. Yeah, so that's a little bit of the demo available. It's fairly short, in a very short amount of time, 45 minutes. What I would recommend in general, if you are interested in learning more about this, right, is that you go to learn.microsoft.com and there's lots of information available. You click on the left side, Azure AI language, and then you've got, well, in this case, 17 models or 17 courses available. And this will really get you started on learning more about this, learning how to do self-study at home. There's lots of useful documentations and lots of useful samples available as well. So that's a presentation. Would there be any questions? You're very welcome to speed it up, even if you want to have the demo a little bit updated. But we still got 5 minutes left.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Dieter. That was great. Really good to see some of these things in action, actually making sense, and how these things come together. So, like you say, those low confidence scores. Is that right? That it's just about training your model with more and more documents, and eventually that confidence score gets higher, does it?
Yeah, correct. So it's important that you train the model with all kind of variations, right? But also you need to deliberately try to diffuse them, right? So try to provide an email where people ask about the car and something else about health, but then, try to see if it's still able to catch up on that. Try to understand the confidence score afterwards and try to train the model with more variations. One of the interesting things that I found is that once you train the model, go to the portal and see if there's any suggestions. But sometimes there's a bit of an overlap in the existing samples that you provide, or the samples are not very good. So yeah, definitely the way to go.
No, that's cool. That was awesome. I don't know if anybody else has got any. I didn't see any questions come up in the chat there. But if no more questions, look, really appreciate your time, Dieter. That was great. Thank you so much for taking us through that. Everybody
Very
wants
welcome.
to use the emoticons, as I call them, to show your appreciation for Dieter. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for the invite, John.
No, anytime. And feel free now to stick around and join in the quiz afterwards, after Johan's talk. Thanks a lot, Dieter. Okie dokie. So I think, Johan, if you are there, sir, we will hand straight on over to you if you are ready.
Yeah, I'm ready. Well, thanks a lot, Dieter, for the great talk. It's nice to meet a person who speaks the same language for me at a foreign conference, but we did surprise John a bit by talking Dutch to each other, but I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to share my screen, see if that works. Yeah, it will work. Let's see if...
Got you.
Yes, it's good enough. Welcome to a talk about Azure Static Web Applications and Blazor 8 WebAssembly. And for me, simply to get to know a bit about the audience. Who of you is actually a developer or has quite some development knowledge? If you can simply raise your hand, I can get a bit of a understanding how many. I do see 2. Okay, that's so the better parts non-developers. That's not a problem at all. You may lower your hand. Okay, great. And I do have a bit of better view of who is actually asking questions. Okay, welcome. I am Johan. I've got a very difficult last name to pronounce in English. It's Smarius in Dutch, but I don't mind any way to pronounce it is good. A bit about me. And yes, I do have the cursor. I'm a developer. I've been a developer for many years, for more than 25 years. I'm quite passionate about .NET. I've been using .NET since version 1.0, and that came out in 2001. So the better part of my career, I've been doing .NET stuff. I still work as a lecturer for Avans University of Applied Sciences in the Netherlands, and I also work as a consultant trainer for my own company, GMX Software Solutions. But that won't last that long because starting September, I will be joining Capgemini as a trainer for the Academy. And I'm here to help. I blog, I have a YouTube channel, I do some things on Udemy, I do speak at events, I do write, I love to teach. And I was awarded this year for the Microsoft MVP status, but that's more than enough about me. You didn't come here to hear me raffle about myself. So what are we going to cover in the next few minutes? We're going to talk a bit about Azure Static Web Apps, but the better part of this talk will be in code and in Azure. So I hope you don't mind. I normally don't like a lot of PowerPoints, even though I'm a lecturer. I like to see things in action. So what is actually Azure Static Web Apps all about? Well, if I look back at my career, when I started doing web development, it was all about simple creating HTML documents and hosting them on a simple web server. And all that web server had to do was simply take the documents, take the requests, and push the HTML documents back to the browser. Great. That was the easy way. Many years back. Then, of course, we got to the situation where we built much more complex web applications, and most of the time that logic was actually situated on a web server, on a beefy web server that could run things like .NET Framework or .NET Core or other things like Java, you name it. And then you simply had things like app services or simply IIS running in the cloud or on-premise. So you did have a very beefy web server. But if you look at what happened the last few years, we do go back a bit where a lot of logic is actually executed within the client, within the browser. So there's no need for a very beefy web server if the client can do a lot of things on its own. But you have to go back to where we started from. You still need static web files like HTML, like JavaScript, like CSS to actually load to the browser. So what I do need is actually a global and scalable solution for static web applications, because things did change a bit. When I first started doing web development, most of my clients were based in the Netherlands. If I now deploy a solution on Azure, I don't know where my clients are. They could be all around the world. So I do need a global and scalable solution. And yes, I do need a scalable solution to deploy our default HTML, CSS, JavaScript images file. But also there is a possibility to use a very specific language. And that specific language is called WebAssembly. And WebAssembly is actually a compiled language. So I take a higher level programming language like C#, I compile that to WebAssembly. The WebAssembly gets downloaded to the browser, and the browser will actually execute it natively, because all modern browsers know how to execute WebAssembly. So it's a bit the same like JavaScript, but yet again quite different, because JavaScript, the code is downloaded and the code is interpreted within the browser. In WebAssembly, the original code is simply compiled, and the compiled code is copied to the browser. So that's a bit different. But there are a lot of static web hosting options, so I wouldn't need Azure for that. But now comes the beauty parts. There's a very good continuous integration, continuous deployment for GitHub and Azure DevOps. And if you're not quite familiar with continuous integration, it will simply mean that I can build my code on a server, and continuous deployment, I can deploy the actual build code to a different hoster, like Azure. And there's a good integration for that. But also, having what we call a single page web application, where it runs mostly in the browser, is quite nice. But I can't come up with many applications, at least not that really serve a business purpose, that don't require any data coming from an external data source, or that they have to push data to an external data source. So I do need to have some kind of API, like the one you actually, for instance, saw with Dieter. He had an HTTP endpoint. So I do have one way must be able to integrate with server-side logic. Well, there's a great integration with API calls out of the box with Azure Functions, but you have an option to bring your own, to use a custom API, but you will come to a paid plan, but that we will see later on. There's out-of-the-box authentication authorization, of course, very important in the current days. There is support for custom domains. I do get the support for SSL and even free. And one of the cool things is actually that there is an option for automatic staging. I've been a developer for many years, and one of the things that I least liked is if I had to test code from a fellow developer, I would have to build the code, deploy it to a test server, and then I can start testing, and then I can actually finally make a judgment call if the code is actually correct. Automatic staging takes at least the deployment part away from me, but we will see that in the demo. But enough PowerPoint. Let's talk code, let's talk Azure. So I'll simply shut down my PowerPoint, and we are going to switch to actually Visual Studio. And don't be alarmed. Visual Studio might seem a bit bloggy and bulky if you're not used to it. You don't have to be a developer to understand this. So what I'm going to do is I want to deploy a WebAssembly project to Azure, as an Azure static web app. So I do need to create a project with a source language. Well, simply, we're going to say here, create new project. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use Blazor. And you're not all developers, that's quite all right. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the WebAssembly specific version of Blazor to build a Blazor application using C# so that I can actually get it compiled into WebAssembly. Okay. Then I do need to specify some parameters. What is my project? What's my location? Well, let's first start out with the location. I'll do have the tendency to put everything in source directory. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to call this this name. Great. Simply copy it. And what I will do, and that's a bit of a strange thing, I will name the project client. And why I do that, I will come back to later on, because it's merely a convention. And I will use the location for the solution name, the same as my path. Okay. There are different versions of the .NET framework that you can use, and .NET 8 is the current long-term support version, so I'm going to stick to that. You can select authentication, but I would have to set up all kinds of authentication stuff in Azure as well. Not going to do that because then I would run out of time, so we're not going to do that. We're simply going to leave it to none. There's a lot of good documentation how to actually use authentication with Blazor WebAssembly in combination with Azure Static Web Apps. What I will do is I will include the sample pages, because there are by default a number of pages that can get generated and that are easy to use as a demo. So, okay, I'm going to create it. And all the other stuff I'll simply leave out. They're quite different, very nice things, especially .NET Aspire. Great topic to talk about, but not the topic of this session. Okay. I do now have an application being generated. And since the better part of the group is not a developer, I'm going to simply only go through it high level through the code. I'll simply zoom in a bit to the solution. What do we have in the solution? And the solution is nothing more than actually a collection of projects, and a project is something in Visual Studio that allows me to actually create a piece of code that belongs together. Well, one of the most important things here is the www root, because this will be my starting point for my application. And you will see there is some static CSS there already, there's some sample data, and there's simply an index.html file. And that index.html file, for those who are familiar with, for instance, other languages, there's a bootstrapping ID here that will actually be the bootstrap for loading the application within the single page application. Well, there are some layouts here. There's a layout for the entire application. There's a layout for the navigation. But I think the most nice things for you to see are there are 3 pages. One is the home page, which is by definition almost always hello world by some chance. So that's the one. There's a counter, and the counter simply shows that you can actually bind to all kinds of HTML elements and that you can actually get binding to a binding setup. And a bit more interesting for this session, there's a weather page, and that weather page simply shows a table with temperature data. And where is that temperature data coming from? Well, this is a special method that is called when the page is actually initialized. It will fetch it from the sample data weather.json. And within the WW root, there's my sample data and there is my weather.json. So it really is in effect at the moment a very standalone application. But somehow I got a customer who is quite interested in this application and who really wants this application to be deployed as a static web app on Azure. Okay, I already told in the presentation there is something like continuous integration. But continuous integration can only work if I have some source code on one kind of repository. Well, GitHub is a very popular repository at the moment. I could use Azure DevOps. I'm not quite sure if people in the audience are familiar with Azure DevOps. I've used it for many years and I really love it, but as you get, GitHub is used very often at the moment. And what I will do, I will simply push this code as it is at the moment. Simply, I will push it to GitHub. And normally what I would do is simply run the code. Well, let's do that before we start pushing it, because we've all heard about untested software being released to production and that it does do a lot of bad things when you do it. Well, let's not simply take our chances, and we do have a lot of time enough to actually run the application. And what will happen, I will drag some windows that's coming in. You will see a progress bar, and if you're familiar with Blazor, you will see that this is really the default application, our home page, the counter page where the counter actually works, and there is my weather data. And to prove that it actually is being retrieved from the JSON file, I'll simply go to network. I force refresh the page. And if I scroll back, at least if I have to wait, you will see that the weather JSON is being returned. Okay, this great app I want to deploy. So this great app, I do have to commit push to a remote source. For the developers among us, yes, I know you can do a lot with the command line, but I can do a lot with Visual Studio as well. And I most of the time use Visual Studio for this stuff. So what I do is I create a Git repository. And I'll simply have Visual Studio help me. So what I do is I will say that I do use the git ignore, and git ignore for the non-developers among us is simply a file that lists all the files that are simply temporary files for Visual Studio in this case to be used, and that should not be pushed to source control. Well, I'm going to use the MIT license as I always do. I will leave out the README because I'm not going to add anything to it as anyway, and I will use my own GitHub repo. I am the owner. This is the repo name, and I will leave it. I will create it to public. Well, create and push. Now it will initialize a local repository and push that repository up to GitHub. And I can show you that because if I go to my repositories And don't be alarmed, there are a lot of them, and most of them are test projects. So if I go there now, you will see that there is some source code here. That's my client, and there are a few special files, the git ignore and the git attributes, that are specific to source control. Okay, that's one step that I have to take within my CI step. But I would really love to deploy this as a static web app. So let's do that. I go to Azure, and within Azure, I create a resource as you would normally do. And yes, normally, if I have a beefy web server, I would go here for web app. I don't want a beefy web server. I really want to have a static web app. And yes, I could scroll through all the different resource types, and I don't know how it's about you, but I always tend to forget where things are. So all I have to do is I'll simply go to static. And if I search for static, you will see the completion that I have searched for it many times. Just wait for it. I hope my press to demo gods worked. And there is my static web app. Well, in my static web app, I will say create. And now a lot of magic things will happen. When I first started using Azure DevOps, for instance, I had to specify a lot of things on the Azure DevOps to deploy to Azure. But fortunately, and that goes for many resources within Azure, you do have deployment automatically generated if you create an Azure resource. So let's do that. Well, I want to create a new resource group because then I can throw away things that I don't need. UG. And I do want to add a name to it. And by the way, if you have any questions, simply raise your hand, because with the sharing I do, I can't see the chat window. So if you have any questions, simply raise your hand. That gives me an alert that there is a question. Then a specific thing I have to do. I have to actually specify a hosting plan. And there are 3 hosting plans available. I will leave out the dedicated one because that's still in preview. But if we look at the plans that are available, there's actually quite a good free plan available if you want to have a hobby or personal project or even a small business project, which you can run for free if you can live with the limitations of the static web app. And if we simply compare the plans, you will see, well, there's no difference in bandwidth. There is some difference in custom domains. Well, if I can use 2 domains, custom domains, for a small application, that will be more than enough. I don't per se need 5 of them. Yes, I do get my SSL certificates. One of the things that don't work out of the box for a free plan are custom authentication. So I can't bring in my own authentication. I can still use the ones provided by Microsoft, which will do in a small business scenario. I won't get private endpoints, so I can't really use VPNs to actually protect my endpoints. It's a small security issue, but for a small project, I can probably live with it. Well, the app size 250 megs is for a small project more than enough. I could go for 500, but why would I? And even for a free plan, I get 3 staging environments compared to 2. So if you compare the 2 offerings together, you can get away with the free plan for many small projects. And what is the nice thing for a static web app? If I select an option within the portal that really needs the standard plan, it will inform me and offer me the possibility to upgrade to the plan. So I can actually simply change plans quite easily. Okay, I'm going to select a free plan. And then there is something that's probably a bit different than you normally see. Normally I can select a region here, but you see here the global region. Well, actually, if you have a static web app, you can compare it a bit with a content delivery network. You want it to be globally distributed because it's only static content. So the region is for a static web app is global. Okay. Then there comes some continuous integration, continuous deployment stuff. Where is my source code? Well, it's located on GitHub. What is my organization? I've put it in my own organization. And fortunately, there's a lot of repositories, but the top one is always the one recently created. And I do have a default branch. And for the non-developers, you simply use branches to split out different pieces of work. And the master branch in this case is simply where all the actual production source will end up. If I want to deploy actually source code, I do need to tell what kind of build I have to do. So Azure already detected that I'm using Blazor, but it's not only limited to Blazor. I could use Angular and all kinds of JavaScript frameworks to actually build a static web app. And Azure knows how to actually work with all these different frameworks out of the box. Well, then there's a thing called application. If you remember for about 10 minutes ago that I did set the app to client, well, that's the reason I did this. If I select a different project name for my web application, that's quite fine, but then I have to update it in this box. The API location, well, I didn't put in an API yet, so I will leave that out. And the output location is my www root. Okay. Then I go to next. Because a static web app will normally be used with an Azure function. And no, I didn't create an Azure function just yet, but in the advanced tab, I can already specify what I want to use. And now you do get the regions, at least in the current version. You will see that there's a preview version for distributed functions where the function will be dynamically deployed to the region for the customer. But that's not in production yet. And if you use the drop-down list, you will see that there are quite limited regions available for these Azure functions. So probably the best one for us to work with would probably be Western Europe. But I'll leave it to Central US because I did a pretest late in the afternoon and I know that Central US is up and running. So I won't take my chances for Western Europe. Okay, the tags, I always leave them empty. So I do get to review and create. And I will say, well, create this stuff. Okay, what you will see is here there is a submitting deployment for the resource group and deployment in progress. Just wait. Yes, I can go to my resource. Normally you would expect I did set up where do my source come from? What can I actually do? Well, if I go to visit my site, you will see the default site name for a static web app. There's no deployment of my Blazor application just yet. Why is there no deployment yet? Well, if I go to my GitHub repo and I hit the refresh button, you will see that there is a workflow file here being generated by Azure. So Azure generates the workflow file for me so that I don't have to do it. And I'm quite happy with it because I don't know about you, but I really don't like YAML. I always make mistakes in it. And so I'm quite happy that actually software builds it for me. And what you can see is it actually works on two things. I push to the master. So I commit new code to the master branch, or I actually do a pull request to the master branch. And what it will do, it will check out the source code. So get the source code out of the Git repo and build and deploy it. And it will do some special things on closing a pull request, but I will leave that for what it is at the moment. If I go to my Actions tab, you will see that there is one workflow running. And I can simply click on it and I can see the logging that is taking place, and you will see that it's already running for 1 minute and 13 seconds. And what I do, it's determining projects to restore. This will take a bit of time. And that's, of course, one of the downsides of presenting things like this when GitHub has to run some actions. So what I want to do is I am going to leave this job to be running. Oh, it's funny if just wait, perhaps if it's fast enough. Let's see how we're doing on time. Yeah, following on deployment. Just give it a sec. I hope it works. One of the things, because it's still polling on deployment, you will see that there are some red errors within the log that are generated. You can safely ignore them. When I first saw them, I was quite scared. Well, I don't like, especially not in deployment scripts, I don't like red error messages, but it really doesn't matter. It really does deploy. Let's see where we are right now. Post, yes, because it's running. So what I can now do is I can use the link within the log, or I can go within my Azure portal. I can go to visit the site. And if I now go to visit the site, you will see the loading, and you will see that the counter works, and you will see that the weather data is being retrieved from my local weather JSON file. Okay, great. Not a very useful application at the moment, because I don't really use the power of Azure. I don't have any Azure function yet in my solution. Okay, let's fix this. So what we're going to do is I'm going to update my code, and I'm going to use the code to actually add an Azure function to it. But before I do that, and the developers among you will probably know, there are changes on my master, so I need to pull the changes that were created by Azure in my GitHub repo down to my local machine. Otherwise, I'm out of sync with my local machine, with the remote repo, which will give some problems. Okay, I pulled them. Great. What I want to do, I'm going to close down all my document tabs, because what I want to do, I want an Azure function to be created. So what I'm going to do is here a new project, and you can see it here in a short list. If I simply search for Azure function, it will pop up here. So I can actually select it. I can click next. What I will do, I will name this API. And what I want to do is click next. Some additional properties have to be loaded from the template. Just give it a sec. Yes, and what I will do is I will use the .NET 8 isolated functions worker. There are some other workers as well, but the isolated worker works quite nicely. And I don't know if you're familiar with Azure Functions. Azure Functions is actually event-based, so there is actually a trigger for a lot of things. And in this case, I'm quite interested in an HTTP trigger, because the Blazor WebAssembly app will do an HTTP call to the function. But you can see there's also kinds of things for Event Hub, buses. I could even monitor databases if new information is added to a table, or I could use a timer trigger. All kinds of nice things, but let's simply keep it to the HTTP trigger. I do have to use Azurite for my local storage. And the authorization level I will put here to anonymous. For the same reason that I put the site to anonymous, I don't want to have to exchange all kinds of keys between my WASM application and the Azure function that I create. And we're not going to use .NET Aspire, so let's simply create this one. Okay, and what I want to do within this application, I want actually to produce the weather forecasts information that is now stored within my Blazor application. I want to get that from the API. Well, great. So what I will do, I'll simply rename this to weather function. Okay, and what I will further do is I do have some code in the weather razor file, which is simply the class definition, the code definition for the weather forecast. So what is actually being exchanged between the API, for now still the JSON file, and our client application. Well, normally, please don't do this at home, but for this demo, I'm going to simply copy the code for the weather forecast to my API project. Normally, you would use a different class library to exchange both or use other kinds of procedures, but not now. So I do have my weather forecast. And what I want to do within my function is I'm going to actually change the function because I'm going to call it weather forecast. I'm going to return some different settings, and you will see a red line, and everything that's there is simply a description based on the temperature. It's a switch to check what will be returned for the summary. So what will this function do? It will return 5 random temperatures to actual the client. Okay. But now I do have a bit of a problem. Well, how do I actually do the combination between the client and the API? Well, for runtime, I do need to update the file that was generated and where I left out the API. So I have to go to my GitHub, to my workflow, to my Azure Static Web App, to my YAML. And what I do have to do is here in my API location, tell actual Azure Static Web Apps that there is an API present and that the code for that is in my API folder. Okay. That will fix the deployment on Azure. What it won't fix is that there is a bit of a different runtime between Azure and my local development environment. If I run this on Azure, you will see that the client and the API, the Azure function, is executed in the same process. This is not the case when I actually use this code in my local development environment, because my API is a project which will run as a process, which will get a certain port number, and the client just the same. So if I want to use this within my local environment, and I do really like to test my code before I deploy it to Azure, I want to run it locally. What do I have to do that? Well, for starters, because it's a different port that I'm running on, I am going to specify some course information that every host, that every client may connect to me and that I don't require any credentials. Well, that's totally fine because it's a local setting. You really don't want this to be deployed this way to Azure because as a hacker, you probably would be very, very happy, not because of the API that we're using, but if you were to do this, you would really get a security incident. Okay, that's enough for the API. But my client, if I look at my weather razor, it still fetches it from the JSON file. So I can actually change that. So what I will do is I will say, well, I want to fetch it from my API weather forecast. And this appears to be in the same process. And that's actually true, because if I go to my app, to my program CS, you will see that the HTTP client uses the base address for the hosting environment. And the HTTP client is responsible for making all kinds of HTTP calls. Okay, so this will work on Azure. This won't work on my local development machine. So what do I have to do? Well, I do have to change a bit, and I have to update something in the www root. I do have to add a file called app settings. Oh, dot development.json. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a parameter to this file. And this file is only applicable if I run this locally using my development environment when using here my debug setting. Then this is the only file that gets executed. And all I have to do is within my program is actually say, well, I'm not going to use the base address from the hosting environment per se, but I'm going to use the fetch the configuration, and if the configuration is ready there, I will use the configuration, and otherwise I will use the base address. Okay. One thing that I do need or want to fix before we start deploying this is if I go to my weather razor, and I do have here my weather forecast in normal casing, and I do like things to be the same. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the same casing to my API call. Okay. If I'm correct, this will do the trick. But I can still not run it locally because it's actually two processes. So what I want to do is I'm going to configure starter projects, and with the starter projects, I can tell Visual Studio that I don't want to run on one single project, but multiple projects. Okay. I'll simply run them, and let's see if my API actually works locally. Any questions so far? Because we do have to wait for Visual Studio to build.
Can't see anything in the chat, Johan, so no, all good so far.
Okay, great. Well, I'm a teacher as well, so it doesn't mean that you are all thinking, well, I don't know what he's talking about, so I'm watching all kinds of other things. No, I keep it low level. I keep it I try to keep it understandable even for the non-devs. You will see that there's a project starting for the weather forecast for my function, and you will see that the API is actually prefixed to the function name. So that's happened automatically, and if you look back at my call here, that's why I added the API as well, because it's added automatically. Okay, let's see if my... Well, it did start, but it didn't push. Open the client. So let's see now. The proof is in the pudding. Let's hope that I did everything correctly. No, I didn't. What did I forget? Let's see if local set. What did I forget? Rebuild API. There's a small problem with using the actual app settings.development.json. It's treated as content, so it's not seen by Visual Studio that it should rebuild things the way it normally should. So I am going to have to stop my debugging session. API client. Okay, simply close them down. Otherwise it can't update it. Determining projects to restore. Yes, but just to be sure, because it was having problems updating it because it ran already. Let's rebuild it just to be sure. Just wait, yes. And if I now run it, let's see if the second one pops up. Second one pops up as well. Okay, the API is running. Let's see if the application is running. And if I did everything correctly, it's loading. It still has an error. Well, that's not a big problem because it will deploy to Azure. So what we're going to do is for the git changes, I'll simply push this code to my Azure, because you're all, the better part of you are non-devs, so fixing the actual code is probably not that easy to understand for you or nice to see. So what we're going to do is I'm simply going back to my Azure portal, or actually to GitHub. Let's first go to GitHub, because what you will see is that there is, of course, a code, and my code now also has the API, but the actions, actually, there is now an edit API. It's building and deploying, and this will take another few minutes to actually deploy it. Let's see what the red lines are all about. Okay, that's great. That's not a problem at all. Okay, it does have to, let's see how far it goes, how fast it will be. Okay, well, we're not going to wait for this too much. We're actually deploying back. No, considering the time, what we are going to do, we're going to let GitHub do its thing. I also told you in the presentation that there is a very good way to actually get a staging environment within this solution. Well, I did set up some demo things already. So what I did, I have the same code as I just showed you, and it's just in a different repo. And what I did is I created a different branch because I did want to change the title of my homepage. Because what I wanted to do, and I can show you that, is I wanted to greet you as a user group. And I did push that to my GitHub repo. But of course, that does not land on the same branch because this is a separate branch because I didn't want to mess up with my normal. So there's a change title. But that change title must be updated or converted to the master branch. Therefore, you normally use pull requests. And what I normally have to do as a developer, if I have a pull request, I go to all the files that my fellow developer updates. And if I really want to do my job well, I do have to get all the code and deploy it. Well, fortunately, once you do a pull request to your default branch, Azure Static Web Apps, the deployment job will run, and I can go here to details. And what will happen is that you will, at the end of the log, you will see that there is visit your site at. Great. I'll simply click this. What you will see is here my updated name. But if I go back to my portal and I'd simply go to visit your site, and visit your site is always the production version, you still will see hello world. So a nice part of it is that it will provide an automatic staging. And for the free plan, you get 3 staging environments, which is for a small team more than enough, to actually test the code that a fellow developer wrote before you actually say, well, I'm satisfied with it. I'm going to pull it to master. Okay, let's see if my deployment already worked. Yes, visit my site. And let's see, it's loading. And to make sure, because I was a tester as well, I never trust the work of a developer. So I go to my network tab. I'll simply refresh my page. And this is because I didn't add one config file. But that's okay. Simply go to weather. And you will see here that the weather forecast API is actually being used. But if I return to my Azure portal, you will see if I go to the resource group, there's no listing of an Azure function. But if I simply go to my static web app, there's an API here. So it's not visible directly as a resource, but there is my function app is actually as a backend type registered with the static web app. Okay. Given the time, let's go to a bit of a roundup. So my conclusion, Azure Static Web Apps are a great option for Blazor 8 WebAssembly. I'm a C# developer. I really like to code in C#. Blazor 8 gives me the opportunity to write a single page web application in C#. And Azure Static Web Apps gives me a very good globally distributed solution to actually deploy my apps. It provides a perfect continuous integration, continuous deployment option. I do have a good API integration. So I have my own Azure function, but I can bring my own. I do have the bloody thing for automatic staging. But then again, it's a very good tool to use, but it's simply a tool. So a fool with a tool is still a fool. Always make good considerations if Azure Static Web Apps is a good option for you, even if Blazor is a good option for you. But then again, that's simply like every choice that you have to make within our development. If you want to get in touch, the best ways to reach me is through Twitter or X. I do have a blog, I do have a GitHub where all this source code is stored as well. And I do have 2 YouTube channels. The first one is in Dutch, because I started my YouTube channel for Dutch developers. But I recently added another one for English speaking persons. Okay, I'll simply stop sharing and let's see if there are any questions.
Fantastic. Thank you, Johan. That was really good.
You're welcome.
Good.
Just looking in the chat, I'm sure Matt has got some questions. This is your
Oh
bag,
no,
Matt.
it's just nice to see. It's just nice to see. The one thing I do find interesting is the Azure functions on the back end. And I think if you go up tiers, you can bring your own.
Yes, true.
Azure function. And there are some limitations if you're using that free one that comes with it as to what sorts of functions you can use. So if you're trying to use anything other than basically HTTP on that function, you've got to go to a bring your own.
Yeah, you got to go to bring your own. But then again, the Azure function that actually is attached to the static web app is purely meant to provide an interaction with or for actually the static web app. So it's quite understandable that it's an HTTP trigger. You could even, I would normally put, if I really have a big system, I probably would put something like API management as the function and let API management handle the rest.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. Although API management can be a bit overkill.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I did add the slide. A fool with a tool is still a fool. That's what I like about Azure and dislike about Azure. There are so many options that look quite nicely, and that you think as a developer or as an architect, well, I want to use that.
Yeah.
But you do have to consider, do I really, really, really need it? Because it's not only that the resources do cost a lot of money, but also it will get an entire overkill and will make the system much more complex than it really needs to be.
100%. 100%. Yep.
Good stuff. No, really appreciate that, Johan. Thank you so much for your time and giving that talk. Yeah, if everybody wants to show their appreciation, there's the react button. This is what not many people are using it, but look, see, there's the round of applause. Here we are. Thank you, Johan. Really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
that, sir. Right, stick around. Let's get straight into it, Matt. Quiz time.
Yes, and for Johan's benefit, the quiz we're running on is written in Blazor WebAssembly and is using a function on the back end that has a signal R trigger on it, which is why I know about the functions piece. So
it's worth reiterating this, Matt, that this is a homebrew quiz platform, right? So this platform, for those that are interested, you can find a video in the Azure user groups that Matt. When did you do that? It's got to be about a year.
2 years ago now, I think.
2 years,
yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and so we went through the process of how it was built. So it was it's been a fascinating journey to get this thing built. And actually, on my backlog, funnily enough, is Static Web Apps as a hosting platform. It's currently running on App Service. And the reason I've avoided Static Web Apps at the moment is purely because of that function limitation. That because I need a signal R trigger because everything's being synchronized that way. It just wasn't supported. And the minute you are not using that function in the back end, it becomes less cost effective because you've got to have an app service there anyway to be able to host the function. So then it kind of gets to the stage where like, well, I don't know which one I want to pick.
Now, a good cost calculation is definitely for the entire process of choosing what option you want to use very important, because it all kinds of free options may sound very nice, but once you really start getting into it, free may not be that free.
Yeah. Absolutely, 100%. Okay, I'm going to switch over to.
While I'm doing that, I'll read out the titles. So the ebooks, I got the titles that we've got available.
I'll start it up.
He says that as he struggles to find. Right, they are Accelerating IoT Development with ChatGPT. Interesting. And a Continuous Testing, Quality, Security, and Feedback packet ebook. So I think we'll do the ebooks as the 3rd and 4th place.
Yep.
Everybody wants to jump onto the quiz, scan the QR. We may as well go all out, Matt. Yeah, 2 Amazon vouchers up for grabs, 1st and 2nd.
Good opportunity today to win prizes. So.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And as always, answers are at my discretion, and my decision is final as to whether or not they're right or not.
We need more than 4 people to join, though, is the thing, right?
Only a small percentage of the questions were generated using OpenAI. No, that's not true. I didn't use any this time, I think.
A few people having to leave, no problem at all. Is anybody struggling? Oh, there we go. There's DB is on. So I can see, I don't know, Simon, I don't know if you're on yet, if you're getting on.
Otherwise, everyone's a very good.
Everyone's a winner. We just got to pick. Well, let's. Good chance to pick up a prize. There we go. Simon's on.
Sorry, I don't know that one.
That's Alexa for you. Hello, Alexa. Who triggered her? Anybody else struggling? I think that's probably. I'm just counting up now. Abdel, are you jumping on? Can you get on? Another 10 seconds or so, and I think just launch into it.
Then we'll start up.
Oh, Abdel has just type in now, just to, if anybody's struggling, then we'll. Oh, you're struggling. Okay, we'll give you a moment. For what it's worth, I use Safari on my mobile device. Usually does the trick quite well.
Yeah, this as a Blazor project, this has evolved. I've actually just done the update to .NET 8 recently, and I started looking at the process of turning it from WASM to the hybrid, the Blazor hybrid app. I got halfway down that route and then decided I didn't want to do that because it was really complicated. the migration path isn't quite as easy as you think it's going to be. And actually, you're probably better starting with a blank project and recreating it. Sadly.
How are you getting on, Abdallah? Are you
Anyone still? Oh, there we go. We've got a Simon 2.
Simon 2? Fair enough. I think he's Simon's got the
Making me
idea.
bet. Okay, I'm gonna start this off because I appreciate it's getting late for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Okay. Last chance. 3, 2, 1. Oh, okay. So Simon 2 is the right Simon. Here we go. The FAT32 partition limit is finally changing in Windows 11 from 32 gig to what? It was announced this week. After like 40 years or something of it being fixed in size. And I saw an interview where the guy said, we picked this number because we never thought anyone was going to need more than 32 gig. App service environment V1 and V2 gets retired this month on which day? Easy one. It's the 31st. Well done. Split the board. Which of the following is not replaced by Azure AI Language Service? So Azure AI Language Service is actually made up of a few old projects. So which of these is not integrated into that? Text to speech, according to the docs. How many inferencing text records do you get per month in the free tier of Azure AI Language Service? It's a straight guess. It's 5,000, which is very generous, I think. Although I suspect you burn through those quite quickly. Which built-in Logic App connectors are not available on a consumption plan? And these are the built-in Logic App connectors, which you tend to find on the standard plan rather than consumption plan. It's Azure Key Vault. All the others were available. If you're using Logic App Standard, you can have a direct Key Vault connector inside. Which of the following is not a feature of the free tier of static web apps? It's private endpoints. Everyone knew that one. Yeah, that's another reason you've got to go to App Service if you want those. Or you can go to the higher tiers of static web apps, I think, now, can't you? What does WASM stand for? It's as simple as WebAssembly. In what year was Blazor first shown to the public? Yeah, you see, now that's got you thinking. It was 2017. One person got that. Oh, lit the board. Which of the following is not an email protocol? Although if it turns out to be one, I'll be horrified. It was POP4. One I made up. Which Windows app will stop receiving updates in November? It was announced this month. Sadly, because it's quite a funky little app to play around with. It's Paint 3D. Could be going the way of the dodo. And our winner is Dieter. Well done. Yay. With Simon.
That was unexpected.
Johan, I'm assuming that's JS is yours?
Correct. That's the downside of using SignalR. If you refresh, then you lose your connection.
Exactly.
Brilliant stuff. Thank you, Matt. Right, can you snip that for me?
Yeah,
And
we'll do. I'll grab a...
Everyone, if you don't mind, just drop your email in the for those top 4. Apologies, Stevie. We've run out of prizes, the top 4. So £25 voucher for Dieter and Simon, Paul and Johan. You've got those ebooks coming over, so look out in your inbox. But yeah, if you don't mind dropping me, I know I may have your emails, but just send them in the chat. Acts as my little memory aid memoir. So congratulations to the winners. Cool. Right. Okay. Let's wrap this one up then. Let me get back to the slide deck. Let me get to the right slide. So whilst waiting for that to load, yes, huge thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks, thanks so much to everybody that joined from a guest and a participant perspective. Really is appreciated. Thanks to the 2 awesome speakers for coming on tonight and giving up their time to impart the knowledge that they've got to us all. Really is appreciated. It goes without saying that the speakers do this in their own free time and put the time and effort to put the slides together. So huge thanks and kudos, guys. 2 fantastic talks again tonight. So this will be going up on the YouTube channel afterwards. So yes, all that leaves me to say is if you can leave us a little bit of feedback by scanning that QR code. It does still work because I checked it last month. But yeah, next date for the next event is on the 18th of September. So put that in your diaries for now. But until next time, thank you all. Hope you've had fun. Go and have yourselves some tea. Thanks for now.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers all. See you soon.